Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show. What's the most important molding in the house? It's not the crown molding. Wrong. Come join me today in the Build Show. We'll talk about it. Okay, why is the crown molding today, right, considered the most important molding that people put in? And when I was starting in the building business in the late 80s and early 90s, it was always the built-up crown was the sign of just this elegance and beauty and, you know, the highest pinnacle. And so, but if you look at things historically, that wasn't so. In fact, there was a period where the crown molding wasn't even shown in some of these catalogs. So we're going to talk today about the history of crown molding and kind of how to use it today, how to get the right scale and proportion and get it right. You know, I'm doing research for this book on historic millwork, 1740 to 1960. And I just finished the first chapter on moldings, okay? And so there's a bunch of things I've learned, but crown moldings were a surprising kind of piece for me because as I got into building in the late 80s, early 90s, when I would go tour new houses and everything else, you know, one of the calling cards of quality was the crown molding. And so the crown molding and the built-up crown has always been this thing that was placed in my head early on that was very important. But what I found is, as I was looking at these books, is that oftentimes it wasn't even there, right? And so there's a couple reasons for that. Basically, before 1830, maybe 1850, before that time, in that classical era of the Georgian Federal and early Greek revival, the crown molding is an important molding. It is something that's proportioned in the pattern books. It is something that's shown as a way to proportion your crown. But as you get into the Romantic era, and if you've followed in my Buildings and Brews on the Romantic or the Victorian era, you know that housing styles change. It's due to a number of things like the rising middle class. Nice houses in 1780 or 1760 were merchants and wealthy people, right? Nice houses in 1860 could be middle class. So you have the number and the proliferation of houses being built changing. And so, you know, it's only natural that the quality of those moldings for these middle class houses weren't quite as elevated as those, you know, merchants' houses of the 1760s. So going through these catalogs, starting at about 1850, 60, 70, you begin to see the crown molding not even there. In fact, in some of these catalogs, I'm looking for it, going, where is it? What's going on? And they'll show pictures of doors and wainscoting. There's pages of moldings, bases and architraves. Where are the crowns, right? And so historically, the crowns weren't quite as important. Now, in nice houses, we know there were crowns. We know that people did put in crowns, but according to the pattern books and according to the research material, this primary source, it just wasn't there. If we go into the 1890s, 1900s, right, you'll see beam ceilings come into the catalogs, very important. Plate rails, right, get equal billing, right? But again, not that built up crowns that we might think would be there. 1920, molding packages began to show up in the molding catalogs. Molding packages showing this base goes with this crown, goes with this casing, right? So there are examples of crown, but there's also packages with a picture rail. Now that rings very true for us that in 1920s, the bungalows, it was just a simple picture rail that went around the room. There was no crown. Maybe you had a beam ceiling in the dining room, but every other part of the house, it was a picture rail. And people will often say, well, the crown got taken out of that house. And I was like, no, it didn't. That was the only thing that was there. So then what happens is we go into the Great Depression and World War II. So by 1930, okay, and 36 in some of these Curtis catalogs, again, the crowns aren't there. Moldings have shrunk quite a bit, but the crowns aren't even part of these packages into the 50s and even to the 60s. So the crown molding, right, has kind of a funny revival, right, that takes place in the 80s with the McMansion era, and it becomes this thing, well, you got to have built-up crowns. All great houses have great big built-up crowns, and the bastardization of crowns started, okay, with McMansions, and it's just kind of a mess. So we haven't really learned the proper way to use it. And I know that you guys will send me videos, hey, what kind of crown should I use in an 8-foot room? And I'm saying, well, you know what? Maybe you don't use a crown, right? And so, no, heresy, whatever. Crowns aren't that important of molding historically as they maybe are today. So here are kind of the rules for thinking about crown moldings today. And here's some things to keep in your head. One, if you have a house built after 1930, okay, between 1930 and let's say 2000, because that's when 8-foot ceilings are really popular right after World War II, I would encourage you not to put a crown in there. And if you do put a crown in there, make sure it's small, 2.25, 2 3/4 at the most, nothing over 3 inches. Problem is, you go to a lot of lumber yards and they'll show you crowns that are like 5 inches wide. These huge sweeping things that are built historically would have been used on the outside of the house to provide the scale for a 2-story building, right? They never would have gone inside, and now we've taken those moldings and brought them inside. It really should be a much smaller molding. So one, post 1930, 1940, maybe don't even consider a crown. There are so many fun things that you can do with casings, with wainscots, with panels, that crown, just get it out of your head that it's this important molding that if you want to show wealth and prestige and everything else, there are so many better ways to do it than sticking a big crown in your room. 2, crown is a proportional tool, okay? Just like every other molding in the house, as the room shrinks and grows, okay, the moldings in that room shrink and grow. So if you've got a 10-foot room, you're gonna have bigger moldings than if you have an 8-foot room. And so all the casings will shrink, the bases will shrink, and the crowns will shrink. So you watch my video on 8-foot rooms, you can see the problems that happen with those short rooms. So remember, it's a proportional tool. It is not, you don't do little clam case moldings on your door, little 2.25, and have, a 5-inch crown. Those moldings should be proportional and they should all work together. Remember, it's a system. And then that's the last point. It is a system, right? There is a way of laying out your room, laying out the height of the chair rail, the size of your casings, that there's an old way of looking at proportioning systems. There's an old way of looking at how rooms should be organized and put together that makes them better, that makes them more beautiful, that gives them a hue and scale, so that you walk into it, you go, I like it here. Okay guys, so crowns, right? There's the little brief history of crowns, how they were used, how to think about them today. I hope that helps you guys. A lot of this stuff is shared on my Patreon page, Patreon Passion for Craft. I'm sharing my library. I'm sharing these kind of historic pattern books and details that really help us build better. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.